Geothermal, is it the future? Let's talk about that. And I bring back an old guest on this episode of The Crude Truth.
In 1901, at Spindletop Hill near Beaumont, the future of Texas changed dramatically as, like a fountain of fortune, thousands of barrels of oil burst from the earth towards the sky. Soon, Detroit would be cranking out Model Ts by the millions, and America was on the move, thanks to the black gold being produced in Texas. Now, more than a century later, the vehicles are different, but nothing else has truly changed. Sure, there may be many other alternative energy sources like wind and solar and electric. But let's be honest, America depends on oil and entrepreneurs, and if the USA is truly going to be independent, it has to know the crude truth.
This episode of The Crude Truth is brought to you by Oil and Gas Workers Association, Sandstone Group, Air Compressor Solutions, Basin Fluids, and the Fuel Pros.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you as always for watching another episode of The Crude Truth. I cannot thank you all enough. Here recently, it showed that I was in the top 25 of the most watched or subscribed energy podcast. So thank you all very, very much. And please be sure to like and subscribe. I also have a LinkedIn and also now a Twitter. It's called @truth_crude. So please, ask any questions, send any feedback. I'd love to always answer any questions that you may have. That being said, I cannot once again thank my guests that are on today. As in my little teaser, I said I brought back somebody old. However, I'm also bringing in somebody that is just truly world-renowned right now. He has been all over the place talking about geothermal energy. For those of you that don't know what it is, I'm right there with you. I have a little bit of understanding, but I wanted to have a good conversation today with this individual and also bring back a geologist that also can understand a little bit about it. And maybe we might even have to have a drink or two along the way. Today, my guests are Joseph Batir and Trey Cortez. Gentlemen, how are y'all?
Doing well. Here and talking.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, thank you guys. Joseph, thank you for coming on for the first time. And Trey, thank you for coming back again.
My pleasure.
There's no secret about it. We'll get it out of the way that obviously you are a whiskey connoisseur. So obviously we'll have to bust one out here in a minute.
I think so.
Joseph, highlight you. You have your own podcast. You are part of a group that is just blazing a trail right now with geothermal. While maybe Trey sets us up our first round, can you tell us something about yourself and let the viewers know about you?
Yep, absolutely. I will start with the podcast because I'll just get that out of the way and it's a little bit easier to explain. It's a podcast called Energy Transition Solutions, where we talk about all things energy transition. I like to say the mission or the goal is to answer the question of how do we keep our current way of living, our creature comforts, all of the stuff we've grown accustomed to, while also having a reliable, resilient, clean, abundant energy grid and lifestyle. So that's the podcast. And my day job is with a company called Tavera. We are a subsurface consulting company. My focus is geothermal lead. So I do all things geothermal, whether that is doing and building subsurface characterization and conceptual models, basically like reservoir modeling, all the way through helping companies understand how they would take what they have already and transition that into a geothermal producing asset.
Yes, I know I had the chance to meet you several months back, actually at an event that Trey and his group, and I'm sorry, Trey, what group is that?
Fort Worth Geological Society.
Fort Worth Geological Society, shout out to them. That you came and spoke to them, and you had some great stuff on literally starting at the beginning and then getting it to the end source. So I thought that was really cool. And you've been speaking across the country about geothermal and about how it really is something that can be really, really important and useful during this, what people call the energy transition.
Yep.
So again, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here and excited to talk about it. Because I think what I've learned is that the understanding of what is geothermal is the first stepping stone to people actually thinking about how it's possible.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's define it, because here we all are. We all basically tie off, coat off. It's hot, right? I mean, it's summertime, so that's what geothermal is, right? It's hot.
Well, yeah. So yes, it's hot. It is the heat that is flowing up out of the earth, and the use of geothermal is taking that heat, harnessing it, and putting it to use, making good value of it, whether that's sitting in a hot spring or whether that's producing electricity, or actually you could even run that through a chiller and produce cold from it.
Wow.
That's what we need to be doing right now.
Obviously, yeah. It is a little warm in here. Trey, which one did you, Trey, for those of y'all that are just listening, Trey has already poured us our first try today. What do we got?
Yeah, so I thought on trend of the topic today, I picked a couple of whiskeys that temperature and the heat transfer was important. So I'll start us off with a little easier drinker. And this is actually a Texas rye called Cooper Family Rye. They're made in San Antonio, Texas. And why this is important is that Texas is booming in whiskey right now, and people either love it or hate it. And one of the reasons people hate it is that it's kind of bold flavor and kind of punchy in the face, strong oak, strong flavors. And part of that is because it ages quickly because we have big heat fluctuations with the hot and cold. So what this distillery has done is they installed HVAC in their rick houses. So they don't have them on all the time, but in the times of the year where it gets really hot or really cold, they try to kind of bring it in a little bit by heating it up or cooling it down. So this is a Texas rye whiskey that's a little bit more delicate in flavor, easier to drink than a lot of the other ones.
Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, it smells good. Oh, that's nice. That's real good.
Yeah.
I get notes of honey.
Really honey, really buttery. Like rye always has kind of a cinnamony spiciness on the tip of your tongue.
Right.
But what's great about this, usually Texas rye, it'll hit you that cinnamon spicy, and then it just goes to like oak and burn on the back end. This one kind of mellows out a little bit on the back.
I like that after with that buttery taste in there. Oh man.
So yeah, this is one of my favorites. It's really easy to find.
That one was very easy. Yes. No, that one, it was right there, and I like the little boxer on it too. I don't know what that's for, but the other one. There we go.
Yeah.
Well, when we're talking, and thank you guys for doing this today. I cannot thank y'all enough. A geothermal, one thing that I have written about myself is that oil and gas can use it. And what I mean by that is that we can transition, dare I say the word, old oil and gas wells into geothermal wells. First of all, can we do that, guys?
The answer would be it depends.
Oh,
as a classic geologist answer.
Okay.
But so I think that there is the opportunity to transition wells into using them for geothermal energy. But I'm glad we've got Trey here. He knows way more about wells themselves than I do, because when actually an area that we both worked, the Fort Trinidad field, it has a lot of hot water production in the realm of 230, 240 degrees Fahrenheit, which is hot enough to produce energy.
Right.
But the question is, do you have enough flow, and can the wells actually sustain it?
Okay.
So
they sure did for us. Yeah, I mean, there's some fields that are more prolific of an aquifer. Something like East Texas, where you have these stacked carbonates that are fractured. Not only do you have the energy that is created by one particular reservoir, but we have these enormous vertical fractures that connect up several. And so unless there's just major baffles between the like shales or impermeable or the fracture stops, sometimes you can get limited reservoirs. But from what we experienced, there was very little limit to the amount of water that could be produced in Fort Trinidad.
Whoa. Yeah. So Fort Trinidad, I would say, is an example of a opportunity for co-production where you can produce it the way it's producing. And instead of sending that water directly to the water tank or into injection or whatever disposal you have, send it through a heat exchanger first, generate a little bit of electricity, you've got a small capital expense buying some new surface equipment, but you can generate some revenue with that could either offset your operating expenses, or depending on how much flow you've got, maybe it's an actual viable commercial revenue generator.
So you can I'll use the word commingle, because like in different formations and zones, sometimes we can pump oil out from different formations, but you can actually produce electric energy 2 separate ways from one well in some scenarios, like at this Trinidad. That's pretty cool.
Well, it's a similar concept that's been happening for a while with natural gas. If you have a natural gas generator on site, you just strip some of the gas out and use that to power the generator that powers the pumps or whatever. So this would be a similar idea. You'd have like a unit that's self-contained and kind of powers itself. And if you have enough left over, you can put it back into the grid or go to another battery or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's a stranded resource. Why not utilize it, produce it, get some money from it?
I didn't even think about that. I mean, you're absolutely, maybe, thank you, Trey. I feel like an idiot. Yeah, because I do, produce oil and natural gas at the same time, and I just didn't think about the water coming up as well. Because, for a lot of people, I sometimes like to say I'm a water producer, and that I just get oil, and on the side, because sometimes you might only get like a 10% oil cut or something like that, right? And of course, we either truck the water out, or we got to put it back down into a saltwater disposal or something like that. So to sit here and think that it's possible to actually use the hot water to generate more energy, which would then generate more power, that would be huge.
Yeah.
Does anybody do anything like that now?
There have been past projects.
Okay.
There are 3 or 4 projects currently that are funded through the Department of Energy Geothermal Technology Office.
Okay.
One of those is actively producing power right now. It's in the Blackburn oil field in Nevada.
Okay.
And that is a co-production setting where they are actively producing oil and then hot water, and they're taking that hot water. And this was a field from a recent presentation I saw. This field already had chillers on it to cool off the oil and cool off the water before sending it in the pipeline or disposing of the water.
Yeah.
So they're replacing those chillers with their ORC, organic Rankine cycle units, to generate a little bit of electricity while also cooling those fluids. Yeah.
That's great. So I operate in Wyoming, and we have a big problem in the winters because it gets so cold that facilities freeze up. And so it makes me think that it's a lot cheaper probably if you have a deep producer in the area to be able to just pipe warm water through pipes. I mean, I don't even know if you would need something more than that, but it's something that starts greasing the wheels.
Something that heats it up a little bit. Yeah.
No, it's greasing wheels left and right now, because I can think of radiators in apartment complexes, right? And just hot water goes through there and it heats up the area. And then of course, steam is a form of energy that you can bring out of this. So it really kind of, again, that was why I wanted to bring you on, because I feel like I don't think a lot of individuals, even myself, is thinking about all the good stuff we could do with geothermal. And one thing else that you had mentioned in your presentation that you did here a while back, you talked about how you can actually then also use the manpower from the oil and gas industry, because a lot of the stuff is the same. Can you talk about? Well, I'm sorry. Let me be a little bit more. A lot of the infrastructure is the same. So you've got a lot of individuals that already know how to work and use stuff. So that's Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. When we're talking about something as simple as, I think Wyoming and the Nevada example that I just gave, both of those have existing infrastructure. In the Nevada example, it was a chiller that oil and gas field workers installed. Okay. And presumably the oil and gas field workers changed that out and put in the geothermal components. Okay. So that is an example where you can take the the manpower, the skilled labor workforce, and the on-the-job training and experience that they have, and start changing things out. And one thing I think, just in case it's not clear, geothermal is produced through wells.
Yeah.
So all of the drilling, all of the equipment, the well design, all of that looks pretty similar. Now, we didn't talk about well conversion specifically. A geothermal well is typically larger.
Mhm.
It's larger in diameter and produces in a different way, but it's still a well. It's still drilled with the same drill bits, drilled with the same rigs. It's more or less an oil and gas well that's larger and instead looking for hot water as opposed to oil and gas.
So, how big is how big is normally a well bore for something like that?
So well bore, it's traditionally a telescoping well bore, starting at something around 30 or sometimes 34-inch conductor casing, that very first one at the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And then the production casing can be anywhere from 7-inch all the way up to 9-inch casing.
Okay.
And the other key thing, most of these wells will produce directly through the casing. So you don't have a production tubing. You're producing from that 7-inch diameter.
Yeah. So that you could, I'm thinking here that a lot of horizontals and things like that are usually about that same, maybe that 5.5 to 7.
Yeah.
Is that
But
right?
I was just thinking that does limit it a bit, because usually, depending on what's uphole, how delicate and how unstable the uphole formations are, most of the long laterals, they end up setting surface casing that's 7.5 inch or something like that. So your production hole that's a horizontal is usually smaller than that, but not always, So, but there's a lot of places that are, but that's at least one limiting factor.
Yeah.
My question, my curiosity, we don't produce up casing in oil and gas for a reason, because it's kind of inefficient. It's hard to lift a huge column of water or oil through such a big diameter. So we prefer a smaller tubing. You can tend to get better pressures and flow better that way. So it seems like it's probably could be a little taxing on equipment to lift that much water, especially because water is heavier than the oil. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is lift a problem in all of these?
Yes, lift does end up being it is one of the larger parasitic loads. You've got your pumping, your lift, and then also your cooling of condensing on the backside after you generate the power.
Okay.
Those are your two primary parasitic loads. And when it comes to lift, the main reason you use such a wide diameter and produce directly through the casing is because you just need so much flow.
Right.
So we're working on a project right now and making a few economic just comparisons.
Yeah.
A barrel of hot water is worth pennies versus your barrel of oil, which I didn't look today, but I'm guessing somewhere between $60 and $80. So you need a lot of water to make something that is really worthwhile to produce. Right. And from that, you need more volume to be able to produce through, or really.
Now, okay, I want to ask this, and then we'll try our next whiskey. When it comes to the volume, are we putting it back in the ground in some cases, or in some cases is it going back in some cases, and is it coming, and is it staying out in other cases?
Most of the time it is going back in. So there's a few examples from earlier on and different countries where they were not putting the water back in, not re-injecting it into the reservoir.
Mm-hmm.
And what you saw is this decline, this exponential decline of production, of pressure in the reservoir, and ultimately of your profitability. And when they realized that, and they're like, oh, we could just start pumping our water back in and we'd be fine, then pretty much everybody started to pump the water back in. I think there are a few fields. Teapot Dome is one example which is in Wyoming, that has this natural water drive. And that's an oil and gas reservoir, but it has this natural water flood that's constantly pushing fluid up to the surface. That is one where you don't necessarily take that water and pump it back into the reservoir.
Okay.
But nowadays you have to do something to dispose of it.
Right.
And there's a few key problems if you're in a semi-closed reservoir, so you're losing pressure. If you don't re-inject, you can lose pressure and destroy your reservoir. You can create subsidence even at the surface. So you can start getting subsidence, kind of like people are finding sinkholes in West Texas, in Nevada, in a few other areas that are related to this, like drawing out too much water. And then you can also, if you're not producing it properly, you can get induced seismicity because of either pumping in too much water or not pumping in enough, and then you start getting constrictions.
Okay.
So those are things we are well aware of, and I am all for having open, transparent, upfront conversations. Like, let's talk about it, as opposed to have a problem and then be like, oh, that wasn't us.
Well, I think it's what's most interesting about all these discussions, especially with people, technical, geologists, engineers that are doing this now, is that we have the opportunity to learn better than the oil and gas industry did many, many years ago, when it was just the demand was so high, we were producing, and despite the outcomes or the impact. So you have smart people that are looking at the pore pressure of a reservoir as you're drawing it out and think, you know what, we're changing the stresses. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Let's try to combat that with some injection. I think it's a really good opportunity to have smart people working on this right now.
Yep, absolutely.
But we can transition into whiskey now if you want.
Okay,
let's do it,
transition.
Man. So this is an exciting one for me. I'm bringing back another whiskey that I had last time we were around here. So this is a Balcones #1 single malt. This is one of my favorite whiskeys for many reasons. But the reason I brought this is that I brought a little companion with it this time as Macallan 12. So the interesting thing about these two is that Balcones is in Waco, Texas, and they source Golden Promise malted barley from the Highland region of Scotland to make this, right?
Oh, say that again?
Golden Promise, it's a type of barley. It's called Golden Promise malted barley. They bring it for this. Macallan famously discovered and started using the same exact Golden Promise malted barley. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Whenever many years ago, they switched over to a very similar barley that's a little more hardy and that can be more efficient. But that being said, the two products that go into each one of these bottles are very much the same. So the main difference you see in the color and the flavor profile is how they're distilled, which is a little different. But my personal opinion, the bigger difference is the climate at which they're aged in. So you can tell very quickly the color is completely different. Texas climate has a lot more fluctuation of temperature, and so as thermal expansion happens to the whiskey while it's in the barrel, it goes deeper into the barrel. It goes in more times, and so you get more of the color and the sugars that come out of the barrel. This was aged in, usually these are like 36 months. Doesn't have it on this one, but 36 to 54 months are usually what this is aged for.
Yeah.
This is 12 years. And look at the difference in color. So
wow.
I've set these up. On your right, you should be able to tell by the color. On your right is the Balcones. So I would recommend trying to smell them both.
Okay.
And notice the differences.
So
huge difference.
It smells more caramely, sugary, the Balcones.
Right.
And the only thing different is the temperature, because this thing just,
the main thing different is temperature, right?
the Macallan almost, I mean, it has an alcohol. I don't know. I'm not like you guys. I don't want to butcher what I say.
No, I think Joseph.
No,
That's good.
No.
So I was about to tell that.
The what?
Like tequila. So
tequila.
That's what it is.
yeah. So
Like, what is that?
it has a very promising or prominent citrus note. It's what I get on it.
Okay.
It's like the citrusy, and a lot of tequilas have that agave. It's kind of a citrus type flavor.
Yeah.
But you'll see the same thing when you. I mean,
Okay.
Balcones has so much.
I guess we'll go with the good smelling one first.
Yeah.
And this is Macallan 12. Like that's
Right.
what I. Okay. All right.
But
Yeah,
you-
Balcones.
realistically, it should, the longer you age it, it should get darker and richer, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
In general, yeah. There's some. It just depends on the length of time. Isn't as important as the thermal expansion that happens. So if you don't get any temperature change, it's just going to sit there, and it's not going to have a lot of convection. It's not going to go into the barrels very far. And a lot of times, Scotch uses already used barrels, whereas we know most of the Texas whiskeys or bourbons have to use fresh barrels. This one, Balcones uses a mixture of both fresh barrels and used barrels. And a lot of times, I don't think they do it anymore, but when they first started these, they just used 5-gallon barrels instead of the 53s.
Okay.
So the surface area ratio is completely different. But I mean, this is a fantastic Scotch. Like this Macallan 12 Double Oak is a fantastic Scotch. It's just much more delicate. It's citrusy. It's lighter. It's
How
it's good on a hot day.
that's okay. Based off the smell alone, I would have thought this would have been more of a kick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little
Real
more fruit too.
Yeah. Very smooth. This is very smooth right here.
43% alcohol versus the Balcones is 53% alcohol.
What's really interesting is I'm just now getting some smokiness and some woodiness on the back end, but it's really more of a smoke.
You guys, both of y'all. I mean, I'm just here like, well, it kind of smells like tequila, and you guys are both like, I think it needs to be. And
Well, you taste the char, like the char on the barrel. You tend to taste it, and it sometimes comes late. What I'll challenge you to taste in both of them that I taste is a little bit of chocolatey. Like, Balcones is known for having a chocolate note. It's pretty prominent, but I just got it a little bit out of the Macallan 2, tasting them side by side.
oh, there. Okay. Okay.
It's like a dark chocolate. I use the Balcones rye to make chocolate old fashions.
What you make chocolate old fashioned?
Oh man, they're so good.
I know. I remember one time we went and ate lunch, and you were like, "Well, we need a dessert whiskey," and I think it was the Rose or something like that. I'm like, "Dessert whiskey? I did not know. I don't know." If it was
I can't remember what it was, but yeah.
But all right, let me say this.
But yeah, so I mean, I think it's interesting just to see two very similar ingredients going into these, and it comes out so incredibly different, mainly because of the temperature at which it was aged.
And I want to take that right there and saying that these ingredients are so much a lot alike, and kind of go back and do a fun transition to where it's like, look at what we can do with these. Like, granted, there are maybe some issues, but that not the Triton. What was it? No,
Fort Trinidad.
Fort Trinidad field. It's like there's now an opportunity in that field and to go in and produce basically hot water, like you're saying, you know, in a field that was known for oil and gas. So all the conditions are a lot the same, but also a lot different. But yet you take a lot of the same ingredients and you come up with two different things.
You know,
Awesome.
I think it's a great analogy.
And I had to tie it in somehow.
Yeah.
I had to try it in somehow.
I'll take it a little bit further.
Please do.
When we look at geothermal, and right now in geothermal there are probably half a dozen new ideas on how we can produce this heat from beneath our feet, and each of those really is kind of like making whiskey. We are taking the same ingredients. We're trying to take heat that's being produced from the earth, from the formation of the earth. We're trying to find a way to harness it to produce energy.
Yeah.
And we're either trying this way or we're trying that way, or we're adding in a little bit here, or we're trying to let it sit and steep in this location. And each way everybody thinks they're going to make the best one. Ultimately, I think they're going to make the best one for their location and their given resources.
That's good. That's kind of a thought I had too, because I've heard about other systems that do this by not necessarily using water, just the heat, and pumping some other fluid down like glycol or something like that has a lower boiling point. And so it would be a closed loop system. Cheers. That you pump something down and boil that, which that turns turbines and,
Yep.
and things like that. So that may not work everywhere, or, if you have water, you use it, but if you don't, that's still an option. If you have enough temperature to boil black oil, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when exactly what you're saying, just like talking about the heat transfer and the way that the whiskey's moving in the barrel, those are the same thoughts and processes that we have to think about when we're trying to produce geothermal energy, because ultimately we are trying to extract heat from the rock.
Right.
So if there's anybody doing computational fluid dynamics on whiskey barrels, I invite them to come join the geothermal industry, because they are thinking about these problems that we are all thinking about.
There's probably someone doing that. Yeah.
I hope so. I think that would be a fun, when we talk about like a collaboration, looking at how you could really add in a whole lot of science into something like making whiskey. And if you want to get very specific notes from that whiskey, you could start doing those dynamics, start controlling the temperature very specifically, and ultimately have that 53 months in a specific profile to try and have an end product.
It's funny. It's a really good comparison to oil and gas too, because you have the guys that have been doing this for 40 years and they're like 3 generations, for over 100 years that have been doing it. And they do that by placing the barrels in a certain part of the rick house.
Okay.
And why is that? Because heat flow is different in different parts of the rick house. And they've just been doing it so many years. And their granddad told them that when you put a barrel there for 7 years, you get fruity notes. So mix it from there and with a barrel from over there, and it turns into this product. I mean, all the Buffalo Trace whiskeys all have a few different mash bills. The reason they're different is that they're all aged in different rick houses and different spots. So in oil and gas, you have the old timers that just know what oil on a log looks like, and they do it. And now you have, I just got back from ERTEC, and you had a slew of talks that are just these huge AI data mining efforts to try and really automate as much as they can to have these sweet spots. And if you do this, then you get that. There's either one of them is not perfect, but I think there's going to be this mishmash of them going forward that finds a happy medium that's going to benefit us.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this. A lot of my leases, again, we're a small producer and a small company, operator. We work in a lot of small towns. Do you think it would be possible for, if the condition, if the conditions were right, that you could almost power a small town of 1,000 people to 5,000 people on geothermal, like with their own power grid? Because basically you got the hot water coming up, get the power source, then the power goes out to the community, and then you shove it right back down and you do it again. Could we get to a point like that somehow, some way?
Yes, I think we can. And there have been people who have tried that before in terms of the community utility drilling a well and using that well for power production.
Yeah.
It hasn't always worked, but I think as we incorporate oil and gas technology, as we incorporate the oil and gas workforce that's already in those towns, we can find a way to, and when we find a way to drill to 20,000 or 25,000 or 30,000 feet and do that economically everywhere, then I think every single small town could have their own 5 megawatt geothermal power plant. And for a town of 1,000 people, for them, it could offset a lot of their power. For other areas where maybe you've got a lot of land that isn't being used for anything, or you've already got something like windmills or solar farms that are there that aren't being fully utilized.
Yeah.
There are other ideas that also incorporate geothermal. This is what we call a synthetic geothermal reservoir, basically using the subsurface as your energy storage device. Here you're storing thermal energy as opposed to having lithium-ion batteries at the surface. So there's a lot of different ways we can go about this, but I fully believe and if I was a betting man and knew where and how to bet on this,
Yeah.
I would say that the future is going to be lots of small distributed energy. So like when you go up to a gas station,
Mm-hmm.
that gas station is going to have electric chargers, hydrogen power plant right there that you can extract hydrogen from, and maybe even their own geothermal well or some type of small system.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think if, when and if not, this isn't a conspiracy theory show. So I'm going to say when and if hydrogen is figured out, weekend has been figured out. But, when that happens, I think that's going to make everything else just, but I do feel though that geothermals, it would fall under the hydrogen, in my opinion, because it is, again, we're still dealing with water. And I think if we can do that, I mean, how much more, because you talk about, pennies on the dollar for water. Well, you know what? Oil at one time was a lot less than what it is today. And it was still think about it. There's some families here in Fort Worth that were making money, multi-million dollars at $1 a barrel a long time ago. So I could see geothermal possibly, if it was done correctly, being able to be something that makes a lot of money in the ESG investment world down the road as well. And so I just cannot thank you enough for coming on and talking about that, Joseph, because you are right. You are that guy that is out there right now talking about that. I don't see a lot of other people talking about geothermal. I really don't. I see a lot of people talking about wind, solar, and how good ESG is. Well, you know what? Guess what? ESG also does have geothermal under the umbrella. It's just not the ESG that the mainstream media talks about.
Yeah. Well, glad to be here. And as I said, I think the most important part is everybody understanding.
Yeah.
Once geothermal is a household name, the way oil and gas is, then I think people will start to see how and why and where and what the value is. And the last point I'm going to make on that, not to get political, but in the last legislative session in Texas, the rights to the heat were, I don't know how to phrase it, but though the rights to the heat are a surface landowner right. According to the recent law that was just passed in the last legislative session. I'm sure you're going to get plenty of emails now that I said that. But that means that anybody who owns a house, anybody who owns a ranch, anybody who has any mortgage or title or deed, they are now geothermal heat owners.
Oh.
So it matters to them. This matters to them.
Wow, that could be a huge game changer in people wanting to do geothermal right there, because those royalties.
This is another topic for another day, and not me. I'm not a lawyer. I can hook you up with the people who will gladly talk about
you
that.
stated it was all fact, concrete, 10 Commandments. You wrote it. I heard that. No, I'm joking.
That's what the legislator said.
That doesn't
not
hurt
me.
legislature. Oh man, well, Trey, tell us what else you got here.
Right.
This one I want to build up a little bit, because I'm pretty excited about it, and this was one of the main reasons why I asked you to come back on.
Yeah. Well, we're
this is it
with something near and dear to my heart. So if you don't know, I am a whiskey nerd. I started an Instagram account called Whiskey from the Rocks a few years ago, and it was basically to put down ideas I had about how geology and whiskey overlap, both in culture, in science. Does the water affect the flavor? Does the cultural regions, geologic provinces? And I found a lot of cool stuff, and so I just started documenting it on Instagram. And apparently, there's not a lot of big time nerds in the whiskey world, and people liked it. So I started that account. It's doing pretty well, so you can check out a lot of things in there. But at the same time, a real good friend of mine that we went to college together and still are great friends. When oil downturned in 2016 and we were working Fort Trinidad Field, our company went bankrupt, and we did not know if we were going to have a job for much longer. And so there weren't a lot of jobs out there. We decided, what happens if we go down with the ship here? can't find another job. Let's start a distillery.
Yeah.
So, we put together branding and logos and all that stuff. Well, and then we both got another really good job. I started working at Burnett. He started working at another company, and he started having more kids. And we're just like, it's probably not going to happen. But so that's not happening. That's not the announcement we're having right now.
Oh, okay.
So, through meeting people and finding out that a lot of distillers are chemists and nerds too, we've made a lot of good friends. And the generous people at 5 Points Distilling, who make Lone Elm whiskey, allowed us to rent out their distillery and make 2 batches of whiskey that we've been wanting to make for a long time. And so we now have them. So these are those. We made a straight rye whiskey and a high rye bourbon. You can see a little bit of oil and gas influence here. You can't see very close, but these pump jacks are pulling out of little wooden barrels, whiskey barrels there.
Oh.
So basically, we got a group together. We funded this thing. We made it. We still have a bunch of aging, but we put some in smaller barrels so they aged faster and brought them out. So what I put in front of you on the left is our straight rye whiskey, and on the right is our high rye bourbon.
Okay.
We made this since we were making it for us. We're not selling it. This is just for like personal consumption. We made 2 whiskeys that we knew we would like.
Yeah.
Or we pulled them off. And so, unfortunate to some, we really like bold, like slap you in the face whiskey. And
You are a slap you in the face coming out of a pop.
Yeah, there we go. So I put a little bit of water on these to make them a little easier to.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Well, we may have to. I may have to.
They're really bold.
They are. I mean, seriously, like this one's comes in at 124 proof, and the other one's 128.8. So I cut them down to about 110.
More water.
Yeah, I cut them down to about 110. You can cut it more if you want. But so the first one is the rye. I would say it's a really bold. We wanted something really bold and really oaky because of what we like. But we did a couple little tricks that bring a sweetness in at the end, and we think that worked pretty well.
This has water in it.
With a little water, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. We really like it.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of oak. It's got a lot of oak to it.
That's a sipping. That there.
Yeah.
That's where you made it. That was good.
Yeah, that's good.
I wouldn't have even known that there was water in that one. That was so bold.
Oh yeah. I proved it down at least 15 points. Yeah. So the other one is a high rye bourbon, which is something we were inspired by one of the local whiskey distilleries, TX whiskey. They made an experimental bourbon. It's just fantastic. And so we thought, if we're going to make a bourbon, let's make it with a lot of rye. It gives it a little spiciness. And this one came off even hotter. We bottled it at 128.8. So I proofed this.
But this one's actually a little lighter than the other one, though.
Yeah, so rye actually takes, and this rye was only aged for a year. We did 12 months in one of the hottest, before this summer, it was one of the hottest
Last
summers.
June, yeah.
It was one of the hottest summers in Texas history. So 12 months in a 5-gallon barrel, and you get that dark color. Yeah. This is the bourbon is actually 18 months.
Oh, wow.
In the same distillery, in the same rick house. And it's not quite as dark, but chemically, rye takes age faster. So,
well, I like judging off the bottles. I like the bottles. I think if you were, now this is not for resale, okay? People out there, let me rephrase that, right? Not yet. But I bet that would fly off the shelf with that label right there.
I know. Around here, at least, we may not be able to distribute other. But this one has a lot of corn in it. Obviously, it's a bourbon.
Oh, that would be good with an old fashioned, I think.
Yeah, I've made old fashions with this, and they are fantastic.
They got something right.
Yeah, it is. It's really good. It's way more corn forward. Still high proof, high corn, high oak. But we dig.
Oh, that's good.
So the hope is, ultimately we like making these for ourselves. We are having conversations now of doing this as kind of a fundraiser in the future, where we'll grab some people together and go make a batch, and we'll donate the money to a buddy of ours. He runs a nonprofit called Project 214 that supports vets and takes them out on camping trips and fishing trips and things like that. And so our hope is to have that up and running within the next year, where we have people that can invest into this, or they can just buy bottles and then we'll give all the money to Project 214.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Well, gentlemen, based off of my cups over here, I think we're at a good spot for the afternoon. Guys, I get excited just when people want to come on the show, and I hope it showed just when y'all both said, let's do this. So thank you guys so much for coming on. I truly mean it, again, to all my listeners out there, that when just anybody says yes, especially that I ask, because obviously if I ask somebody to come on, it's like, I like them, right? You know, it's like, to me, you're a big deal. So you know what? I'm a fan. So thank you guys so much for coming on. Trey, where can people find you if for whatever reason they want to talk whiskey or maybe some geology? I mean, I know some people have asked you before to look at stuff just because, you know, say, this geology
as
looks
long as
good.
it's not a direct competitor, I'm happy to look at whatever. No, I'm on LinkedIn, Trey Cortez at LinkedIn. But yeah, Whiskey from the Rocks on Instagram at Whiskey from the Rocks. That's a really good place I put a bunch of content out there that's super nerdy.
You do. There's two things, I got to mention. I got to three things. First thing is your haircut looks great. It looks like you went to my barber. But it wasn't his skills. It was the whiskey selection that he had. That
Very good whiskey selection. Yeah.
Then the other thing I wanted to talk about was JP Warren. And as much as I love JP, you were talking about getting people to learn more about geothermal and things like that. You know, he's got his kids crew. Maybe he needs like a college crew. Because I bet a bunch of college kids would love to learn how to make whiskey and do science all at the same time.
Dig it.
But Joseph, again, you know, this idea started with you when I had a chance to meet you here at the Fort Worth Geology event, Geological Society. Is that right, Trey?
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you so much especially for coming down to Fort Worth. And I cannot thank you enough. Where can people find you, and where are you talking at next?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn as well. It's Joseph Batir, and my podcast, Energy Transition Solutions. So feel free to find me on there. I do have an Instagram. I don't post things, but it sounds like I should start posting nerdy things.
I just tagged you today.
It's rock.joe.
Rock.joe.
Yeah, so you can find me on there. Maybe I'll post things.
My producer keeps wanting me to get one, huh, Chris? Yeah, he keeps wanting me to get an Instagram, but I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Well, JP Warren and I had a Instagram live.
Yes, y'all did.
Ray made some crazy look like a scam account, and he popped onto the live and like, who's this guy? I was like, oh, that's Ray.
That's great.
But it's not my account. Yeah, I don't have an account.
Yeah.
Maybe one of these days I should get one. But no, gentlemen, again, thank you guys so much for coming on. Well, to all my listeners out there, please be sure to subscribe. Definitely connect with us on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube, and also please check me out on Twitter. Maybe one of these days I can get an Instagram account. But thank you all for listening or watching this episode, and we'll see you next time on The CRUDE Truth.
This episode of The CRUDE Truth is brought to you by Oil and Gas Workers Association, Sandstone Group, Air Compressor Solutions, Basin Fluids, and the Fuel Pros.
The easiest way to start your own podcast and TV show? Real News Communications Network. Stand out from your competition. Produce streams of high-quality social media content. Become a thought leader in your industry. With RNCN, you get to be the host. We handle everything else. Tour one of our 3 locations in Dallas, Fort Worth, and the Colony. Call 972-402-6333 or visit launchashow.com to find out more.